A booming jobs market puts pressure on the Reserve Bank to lift rates again. How a change of colour and a few harsh words boosted the tax office coffers. And Rupert Murdoch set to take the stand in a defamation case in the US. It's Friday, the 14th of April, 2023. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, your interview today is an interesting topic. You're speaking with Angela Anassis after the show. She's the Executive General Manager at Randstad.
Yes, all about the workforce, obviously. That's what Randstad does. It's a recruitment group, but particularly about older workers and how they fit in culturally, how much they get paid, why they don't quite get the training that some of the younger folk get. Close to my heart, this one, Michael, close to my heart.
And I'm going to leave that alone because I don't want to offend you and point out the differences between us.
In fact, I pointed out the differences between us in the interview and I was very nice about you, so I think you should be careful.
It's actually worth listening just to hear how nice you are about me. It's quite touching.
You know, when you're with, it's kind of when you meet your parents' friends, you're on your best behaviour. I felt like that. I was doing an interview with Angela and I felt I couldn't really just slander you because you weren't there. I mean, in front of you, no issues there whatsoever. Yeah, so I was very nice to you.
So essentially you were being quite dishonest.
Well, I suppose. I mean, that's sort of a different take on it, but kind of.
Oh, well, now you have to listen to that interview. It's coming up in a little bit. But the main story this morning, Sean, anyone hoping for no more interest rate rises will certainly be disappointed after 53,000 people were added to the workforce last month, putting more pressure on prices.
The stronger than expected outcome takes total employment in Australia to a record level of 13.88 million. Massive. The unemployment rate remains at 3.5%, a near 50-year low. The big jump in March came in full-time jobs, which rose by 72,000, while part-time roles dropped by about 18,000. The proportion of people working full-time compared to part-time is now 70%. It's a decade high. The Bureau of Statistics figures shows that the labour market is tight, very, very tight. The participation rate is high. People are working plenty of hours. It is a red-hot labour market, Michael.
And that's obviously great for people with a job or people wanting to get a job. But as I said, it's not necessarily great news for those with a mortgage, hoping that rates will kind of stop rising.
Earlier this month, the Reserve Bank didn't hike rates for the first time in 11 meetings. The Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe subsequently said he'd be looking at the data, inflation figures, business sentiment, household spending and the labour market. Well, the labour market is going gangbusters and that will put pressure on wages. Wages feed into prices. Mind you, some of the leading indicators of employment like job vacancies, advertisements, hiring intentions are just a bit softer. But overall, Michael, it's an inflationary environment, at least in the labour market.
Can I just get a quick definition? Really, leading indicators. It's one that you often use, and it's just handy to understand exactly what a leading indicator is compared to the opposite.
So yes, there's leading and lagging indicators in economics. Leading indicators are things like the ANZ job ads or job vacancy series. Seek put out a series yesterday about jobs online. It's not measuring what employment is, but it's measuring what employment's likely to be in the future, i.e. it's leading the actual number. So if there's a vacancy at some point, presumably that becomes a job. So it's a leading indicator. Whereas lagging indicators, this is the employment number. In fact, anything from the Bureau of Statistics, well, not anything, most things from the Bureau of Statistics are lagging because they're measuring something that has happened.
Thank you. Did you notice that when I said leading indicators as opposed to the opposite, I didn't nominate what the opposite was? I just like... It just vanished out of my mind just as I went to ask you. I'm like, don't embarrass yourself, Michael.
No, that's all right. I thought you probably didn't know, so I just jumped in and this second nice thing I've done for you today.
Now, Sean, the figures followed some good news on inflation in the US overnight Wednesday.
Yes, lots of people in markets were looking for this one. So the March Consumer Price Index in the US came in at 0.1% for the month. Inflation was 5% for the year to the end of March. That's the smallest year-on-year gain in almost 2 years. That's good news. However, as President Joe Biden said, inflation is still too high, well above the Federal Reserve's 2% target. Now, core inflation, which removes volatile items like food and energy, hit 5.6% for the year, which was actually higher than February. Put all that into the mix master. The consensus view among economists is that the Fed probably hasn't done hiking rates yet, and it's the same deal here. The consensus view is that the Reserve Bank probably has another rate hike left. Is there such a thing as a mix master now?
I don't know whether there is, or Breville. Just say put it all into the Breville, get the stick blender out.
The Breville, but Breville has to be a toasted sandwich maker. I know they've got a range of other products, but it's kind of like the Rover is the lawnmower. The Breville is the toasted sandwich maker.
So you're putting it all in and you're making a very cheesy economics jaffle.
Ooh, nice. Something like that.
Kind of gross thought, really, isn't it? Anyway, How did local markets respond?
The S&P ASX 200 was actually trading higher yesterday morning ahead of the labour force stats, but the prospect of rate rises put an end to that. And by the end of the session, the bourse was down 0.3% to 7,324 points. The big supermarkets fell sharply, with Coles down 2.5% and Woolies off more than 1%. Aristocrat Leisure and Fortescue Metals Group both fell. BHP and Commonwealth Bank were both down around 1%. The energy companies, Woodside and Santos, ended in the black. So too Industrial Property Group Goodman, WiseTech Global, the software leader, ANZ and National Australia Bank. Very mixed, really. Best on the day was Corporate Travel Management. More of that shortly. Worst was Block, which ended the day down nearly 6%. Michael, in bond markets, because I know you love bond markets, yields rose following the labour force data, with 3-year bonds up 6 basis points and the 1-year rate up 5 basis points to 3.25%. 3.25% in a year's time. That's what the market reckons the cash rate will be. Now, given it's 3.6% now, they're basically having a punt on a rate cut some point over the next 12 months.
International markets, Sean, what's going on?
Well, the US inflation figure was welcomed broadly across global financial markets. Oil rose to its highest level this year as slowing flows from Russia, production costs by OPEC Plus, and falling US inventories suggest that market is tightening. The upbeat jobs figures here and greater expectations of rate rises pushed the Aussie dollar back above 67 US cents yesterday. And finally, the Bank of Canada left interest rates on hold for the second straight meeting, saying recent data was reinforcing its confidence that inflation is slowing. The reason I say that, Canada and Australia are very, very similar economies. Now, that's 2 straight meetings that Canada left interest rates on hold. Maybe we'll do the same. Having said that, Canada started lifting rates before we did, so maybe we're still a few months behind.
All right. Sean, there's plenty going on. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, the International Monetary Fund is urging Australia to expand consumption taxes like the GST to help repair the budget deficit, but Treasurer Jim Chalmers is having none of it.
Yes, so the IMF Deputy Director for Asia and Pacific, Anne-Marie Gould-Wolff, said Australia should consider increasing its version of the value-added consumption tax. That's the GST. Now, it's remained at 10% for 23 years. She told the Financial Review that Australia was doing better than many other economies in the Asia region, but it needs to shift to more indirect taxes for both efficiency and revenue reasons. Asked about the comments, Chalmers, who's pretty much been like Eeyore when it comes to the budget recently, said raising the GST would not fix the problem since the tax was collected by the feds and distributed back to the states. Jim. Look, I think we all get the distributional problems with the GST, but pretty much everyone disagrees, from Ken Henry, who was the architect of the blueprint for tax reform in Australia, through to most economists. The GST probably has to be lifted or at least broadened. Chalmers, I'm not so sure about this distributional issue. Anyway, of course, raising the GST or expanding it is not a decision any party has had the political will to take on. I don't think this government will either. Not a criticism, just a fact of life, unfortunately.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like there's much appetite for widespread reform like that.
Do you know how to spell Eeyore?
Maybe double E, Y-O-R-E.
Oh, well done. So, that is right, double E-Y-O-R-E. When I was writing that, this morning, I was thinking to myself, how do you spell it? And so then you Google to see how you spell it. I had no idea. Anyway.
There's only one letter difference between Eeyore and eyesore, isn't there?
There's an E in the wrong spot and an extra S. A couple of letters.
No, but I mean, if you just swap it's one letter, extra letter.
No, because there's double E.
Yes.
E-Y-O-R-E.
But you swap the E and the Y around and add in an S, and it's eyesore.
And so you take out an E, add an S.
No, but you still need...
Oh, let's just move on. Where are we? It's a Friday morning. We've lost it. We apologise. Let's get on. I like the next story.
All right. Well, yes, we must move on. And that would just be a very small change to add an S in and suddenly it becomes eyesore.
The funny thing about it is I know exactly what you're saying now and I totally agree with you. You're right.
Yeah. It's an anagram with an extra S. And I'm glad we settled it. It shows the importance of a small change, doesn't it, Sean? A small change like the one that was made in the wording of a letter to 20,000 Australians.
Ooh, I like that.
Who had failed to complete their annual tax return on time. And that small change increased the number who then coughed up the money they owed the federal government by 40%. That is an impressive return on that investment. Just one small change, massive return.
It is a great story. A random trial conducted by the Taxation Office to nudge people into paying their tax also revealed even changing the colour of the letter affected the pace at which taxpayers responded to prompts to get their affairs in order. Now, this is according to a report in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Every year, the ATO handles about 43 million tax returns and business activity statements. About a quarter of them are not completed on time. In a bid to find ways to get people to complete their tax returns, the ATO conducted a random trial in the second half of last year. It's about 20,000 individuals and businesses who owed a tax debt and had already been contacted twice about overdue returns. So there are two different messages printed at the top of the letters. One was a soft message, something like, "Don't get further behind, lodge now." The other one was a hard message. It told recipients that not taking action to get up to date will be treated as a deliberate choice. Now, within a month, 13% of those who had received the soft message lodged their tax return. The hard letter lodgement rate was 17%, which is about a third higher, which is where that 40% comes from. Incredible, though.
That's amazing.
Just be nice to the people and they respond.
It's probably teaching us the wrong thing, really, isn't it?
Possibly, yeah.
Now, Sean, yesterday was a good day for corporate travel management. Its share price jumped more than 12% after it won a new contract with the UK's Home Office.
Yes, it's a very interesting company, this one. It does a lot of business travel work. Now, it's won a 2-year, $3 billion deal to provide the department with accommodation and travel services. You can imagine the Home Office in the UK would have thousands of workers, and this would be a massive contract, or it is a massive contract. There's also an option for a further year. Europe is already corporate travel management's biggest revenue source, and this will likely boost earnings significantly next financial year. Business travel is back, and Chief Executive Officer of Corporate Travel Management, Jamie Ferris, pointed out yesterday that half of his company's revenue is government or essential services. He didn't say it, but they're really good payers. They pay on time, and they don't tend to be as cyclical as private companies. Governments just don't pull back on travel like private companies do. Corporate Travel Management's share price is 4 times its COVID low back in March 2020, and it's up more than 40% this year.
Resources Minister Madeleine King said like-minded foreign investors will be welcome to invest in Australian critical minerals projects, just as those developing the next generation of Australian mines warn against excluding China.
So the Albanese government will soon release a critical minerals strategy to address national interest concerns over China's dominance of supply chains for minerals, things like rare earths. Critical minerals are essential for decarbonisation, defence applications, that type of stuff. And Ms. King yesterday said that the government strategy will push back against the concentration of critical minerals industries in China. According to the Fin Review, she said market concentration leads to fragility, volatility and unreliability of key materials like rare earths. That creates a strategic challenge for Australia. The question, though, is how do you invite overseas investors in without banning the Chinese?
Yeah, that is quite a challenge, isn't it? Sean, a worrying story that we've been following for a few days now. Cyclone Ilsa was forecast to reach Category 5 intensity as it moved across the East Pilbara coast overnight.
That's the strongest possible category for a tropical cyclone, and Ilsa was expected to cross the coast between Port Hedland and Broome, producing wind gusts of up to 260 kilometres an hour. Several mining sites owned by BHP and Newcrest have been shut down, with 400 millimetres of rain forecast and abnormally high tides and destructive winds. The Great Northern Highway between Broome and Port Hedland was closed yesterday morning. Several evacuation centres are now open. Let's hope that things turn out okay.
Yes, indeed. Finally, Sean, this is an interesting one. Services Australia, which runs Centrelink, will no longer rely on external debt collectors following the robo-debt debacle.
Government Service Minister Bill Shorten said the use of external debt collectors resulted in thousands of people receiving poor treatment, and the practice will finish in July when contracts end. Services Australia is currently relying on external debt collectors to serve around 10,800 Australians. Shorten said these Australians' debts, amounting to about $43 million, will be transitioned back to being handled by Services Australia. The department will receive additional funding to run its own debt collection. Given the debacle, as you called it, of robo-debt, I think this is a good decision.
Okay, moving to international news now, and Fox Corporation Chairman Rupert Murdoch is expected to be called to the witness stand in Dominion Voting Systems defamation suit against his company next week.
Bloomberg is reporting that opening arguments are set for Monday and Murdoch would be the second witness called. Fox is defending itself against Dominion's claims that the network's bogus assertions that its voting machines were rigged to propel Joe Biden to victory in the 2020 election damaged its reputation. Now, Dominion is still receiving threats from the network's backers, from backers of Fox, who believe the claims, which are totally bogus. Fox has been fighting hard to avoid Murdoch having to take the stand. That's not going to happen. He'll be there on Tuesday, it seems. Separately, Fox News faces an investigation into whether it wrongly withheld evidence from Dominion, with the Delaware judge appointing a court official to determine whether Fox misled him about Rupert Murdoch's role at the network and whether documents and recordings were properly turned over to Dominion.
From one spectacular court drama to another, Sean, former President Donald Trump has filed a $500 million lawsuit against his former attorney, Michael Cohen, for allegedly violating their attorney-client bond and spreading, quote, embarrassing or detrimental lies.
Mr. Cohen, who's had a spectacular falling out with Mr. Trump, was also accused of violating a non-disclosure agreement with Mr. Trump and fraudulently misrepresenting $74,000 in business expenditure. That's according to the suit filed in the federal court in Miami. Now, public statements by Mr. Cohen helped form the basis for last week's criminal indictment of Mr. Trump by the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, as well as a $250 million civil fraud suit brought by the New York Attorney General, according to Bloomberg. Previously, Mr. Cohen has pleaded guilty to crimes including campaign finance violations and bank fraud. Since then, he has become a strident critic of Trump. Mr. Cohen's lawyer, Lenny Davis, yesterday accused the former president of abusing the judicial system in an attempt to harass and intimidate his client.
The drama goes on, doesn't it? It just it never seems to end.
And you just wonder the resources being spent on this stuff.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Sean. And now up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview with Angela Onassis, Executive General Manager at Randstad.
Yes, all about the workforce, but particularly older workers in the workforce, what they're being paid, whether or not they're getting training, all sorts of things. Fascinating chat with Angela.
Now, Sean, we have a nomination for MIA, Most Enthusiastic Advocate. Terrible acronym, very prestigious position, though, which is basically the person who has been kind of spreading the word about fear and greed. And today's Mia is one who's been spreading the word pretty much since we began. Liz von Munster from Minter Ellison has been a listener, well, really since day one.
Oh, Liz, fantastic.
So a long overdue recognition as the Fear and Greed Mia, Most Enthusiastic Advocate.
What a way to start your Friday.
Yeah, well said. A very, very good way to start your Friday. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Friday, the 14th of April, 2023. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Make sure you stay up to date on all the business news with Alexa and your Amazon Echo smart speaker. Simply say, Alexa, play the Fear and Greed podcast to catch the latest episode. Grab yours now at amazon.com.au. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.